What's going on, guys? We are back, baby, and we have a brand new CivDiv video. It says "Those Who Stayed," and we love CivDiv on this channel, man. He's the GOAT when it comes to making this kind of content because he has been on the ground. He is one of the few, if not the only other creator that I know that's making this type of content who's been on the ground in these areas. So very, very cool. This was actually sent to me. This video was sent to me saying that there are some similarities in what I've talked about in my last couple of videos regarding America's support to Ukraine, Europe's support to Ukraine. There's some similarities in what I've said and what's in this video. So we most likely would have watched it anyways, but I'm very interested. Before we jump into it, please like, share, subscribe. We're on the road to 50K subs, guys. Let's get there. Let's push it. And lastly, we still have our until the end of the month. We've got the ORC SHASHLIK t-shirt on the Different Breed merch website. This was via request from you guys. On the front, it's got Slav Ukraine in the Ukraine colors. On the sleeve, we got the brand. And then on the back, you've got the ORC SHASHLIK, which means orc barbecue, like Russian barbecue, with the orc on the skewer with the Z helmet. Very cool. If you're interested and you want one, link will be in the description. If not, that's cool too. All right, let's jump into this video. I'm very curious about what this is about.
Sorry about that. I've never been on the winning side of a war. I worked as a volunteer soldier in 3 wars the USA supported at some point in time. I wanted to live like our allies, see the war through their eyes. And every single time, I've seen the US drop support out of seemingly nowhere. I've been called a terrorist by my own countrymen. I've been told that this isn't my war, just go home. Some people have even called me a war tourist. But all I can say to the average person who can't look at my heart is I've been fighting for freedom. And it's all been US aligned, US supported and funded. So what I'm doing today is showing the impact of losing US support and how that damages our reputation and our legacy. I'm not here to discuss isolationism versus getting involved. I'm not here to discuss which politics are correct. And I'm definitely not here to tell you where to send your young men to fight. But for myself, I certainly will. And what I saw during those times that I did has truly shaken me to my core.
Where are you? F***ing hikes, man.
Hold on, I just need to see that again.
A lot easier.
Shaking me to my core.
Wow. That's a sight that I would never like to see again. US flag next to the Russian flag.
Where are you? F***ing hikes, man. A lot easier now that I prepared for.
When I was first traveling to Syria to join the Kurds during their fight against ISIS, George Bush Sr. died, and the Kurdish man who took care of us at the safe house asked how I felt about him. I didn't have any opinion. I was born in 1996, but he certainly did. Without spieling you a bunch of history, our president had lied to the Iraqi Kurds for his own geopolitical ambitions, which resulted in the death of 50,000 of them, and then basically denied any involvement. I was a 21-year-old kid. I had no idea about any of this. So in some ways, I was justified by that ignorance. But nonetheless, I knew that this trip to the Middle East was going to be the most humbling experience of my life. When I joined the YPG, the Kurds I was with were under the impression that by defeating ISIS, they would be given sustained support by the USA. They fought for years as the only true ground soldiers against ISIS. Then in 2018, their dreams and aspirations and promises were smashed in front of them after the invasion of the Turkish military into Afrin. The Turks, which backed the Al-Qaeda rebels in Idlib, expanded their control into a US-backed group fighting ISIS, killing thousands of fighters and taking over land that was not only controlled by, but had a huge Kurdish population. How could this happen with the USA's support of the YPG against ISIS? Early in my time there, ISIS was backed into a corner in southern Syria. Their caliphate had shrunken to just 2 square kilometers.
Wow.
And the word that I got, not only from my fellow international friends who had served years there, but also the local fighters, was that the YPG wasn't going to finish them off yet, because they knew that the US support would drop almost immediately after, and Turkey would invade once again. As soon as the headlines say ISIS defeated is the same day that the US public would turn their heads to the next new thing. So after 3 months of stalling, ISIS finally surrendered. Over and over, the Kurds asked for some sort of no-fly zone, but were denied.
I absolutely think the United States at least expected a no-fly zone. And I was surprised that they didn't do anything. Like, that was very, they're playing like a really passive game right now, and I don't know why. I'm still not sure, like, really what happened, or like, if there was some sort of plan, but from my perspective, there wasn't, and it was just a massive failure.
We knocked out, you know, I defeated 100% of the ISIS caliphate.
And we are bringing our troops home. The caliphate has crumbled and ISIS has been defeated.
The USA found itself in a very peculiar situation. They had to very carefully balance the group that they were backing to defeat ISIS, and on the other hand, they had to back Turkey, a fellow NATO country, a de facto dictatorship whose president has been in power for the last 22 years. Yes, you didn't hear that wrong. Just like Putin, Erdogan was in power first as prime minister and then president for the last 12 years. Nonetheless, Turkey is a hugely influential partner in NATO. Strategically, to have them not just align with their enemies, but to be unrestricted in a vital part of the world would be terrible news for everyone. So I see why they're a part of it, but this story continues when Ukraine comes up. Keep in mind that the last 4 ISIS leaders were all killed in Turkish-occupied territory, hidden within the same group that just took over Syria earlier this year. Turkey is not our friend, but our leaders have bended over backwards to help them, even while betraying the Syrian Democratic Forces. The only place in Syria you can safely not wear a hijab or practice your own religion is the Kurdish-held territory.
A number of Yazidi civilians were airlifted off the mountain, away from the reach of Islamist extremists whose aim is to wipe them out.
The Christians of Iraq. You might remember that term. It dominated Western headlines for a brief window of time.
We're on board there trying to help them, just the relief.
After my time in Syria, I felt a calling to go back and serve alongside Kurdish fighters once again, but this time in Iraq, fighting alongside the Sinjar resistance units, or the YBS. During the ISIS invasion, the Yazidis, Christians, Kurds, and Jews who resided in the Sinjar mountain range were forced to fight for their very existence. And truth be told, the US did help at first. They delivered airdrops, coordinated evacuations, and put airstrikes on ISIS positions. Eventually, with the support of the YPG in Syria, the YBS were able to...
Dude, I know nothing about any of this. This is crazy. This is the only thing I know about YPG and the YBS are from a couple of guys I've known who were there and are now in Ukraine or were in Ukraine, and through CivDiv videos. But this is fascinating.
Hold the line. And after many months, the YBS were finally able to break the siege when the Peshmerga and Iraqi army finally returned to their ill-equipped militia. But the YBS learned the exact same lesson in that moment. Nobody was coming to permanently save them. When the fighting started, the Peshmerga and Iraqi army left. And now that it was all over, the Peshmerga and Iraqi army now wanted this land for themselves. But the history of the YBS goes back to 2007, before ISIS even invaded. They were born out of necessity after enduring repeated suicide bombings while the Iraqi army turned a blind eye. They were the only ones holding the line back then, and once ISIS was pushed back, the only people who stood shoulder to shoulder with them were the Kurds. And that's who I served with, the combat-hardened fighters of the YBS. When I joined them, I was immediately confronted with the reality of American abandonment. It was evident in the very shape of our houses. We lived under the grass. We built our lives underground. Because the US failed to see the fight through. Those Christians of Iraq headlines were great for political points against ISIS, but they were quickly forgotten the second that specific fight ended. Today, the YBS faces a relentless new threat from Turkey.
Is that a bomb or is that a jet or something?
They have no advanced missiles to take out these drones and jets. There is no US enforced no-fly zone to protect them.
You know what?
The USA simply forgot they existed.
I see the big one. What's up, buddy?
They're still bombing.
They're still bombing. All right, get inside. I'm getting Kamal. Get inside, get inside. Yeah, I heard that.
My friends are still living in those crude conditions, digging deeper and deeper into the earth just to survive. But many have still been killed. My commanders, who first picked up rifles to defend their homes at the age of 14, are now buried in the very tunnels they dug. Half my platoon were women fighters, and many of them have likely been killed as well. It is a tragedy.
She left home 2 years ago to join the YPJ, the Kurdish Syrian Women's Protection Unit.
Their resistance continues in the darkness of those tunnels, but the world's attention, it's moved on. Of course, the USA cannot be the policeman of the world. They're not the ones who started this. But we also can't hand out conditional temporary support and then abandon our allies to be hunted from the sky. And then suddenly expect them to rise up and bleed for us against regimes like Iran. The Kurds learned their lesson with the USA the hard way.
Back out!
There's an old Kurdish saying, there are no friends but the mountains.
Explode!
We were very disappointed by the Kurds, to be honest with you. The Kurds let us down.
The Kurdish people are the largest stateless population on Earth, numbering over 40 million. During the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, Great Britain and France carved up the Middle East. And that's why all their borders are just a bunch of straight lines. And the Kurds were left without a country at all. They have been fighting for their existence ever since. Their new governments have massacred them and actively tried to erase a deep-rooted culture and language that dates back to ancient Mesopotamia. They have unique traditions and ways of life that simply don't coincide with the rulers forced upon them. They know better than anyone what it means to be abandoned.
That looks familiar.
And of course, we have to speak about Ukraine. When I first arrived in Ukraine at the start of the invasion, the US backing was incredible. Everyone was united behind the Ukrainians. Russia started this war as the aggressor, clearly aiming for total victory and the subjugation of the Ukrainian people.
Get inside the house, get inside. We gotta sit down.
But it didn't play out that way. The world watched Ukraine's resistance and knew backing them was the right thing to do. The US had even spent years cross-training with Ukrainian Marines years before this invasion even happened, preparing them for this eventuality, and it paid off. And then, armed with the older equipment we sent them, they retook vast swaths of land. All they needed was continued support and better technology to finish the fight. For a moment, Russia was quite literally on the run. Ukraine broke through their layered defenses, and the Russian military was in shambles. Mass-produced FPV drones didn't exist yet. It was a classic war of maneuver. But then the funding started to trickle. We started to send just the same weapons, but nothing with the range or authorization to hit inside of Russia.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We were tying their hands behind their back. It became a half-assed effort. And because of this, the front line stalled at the most vital turning point in the war.
He's right behind them. Hey, there's gonna be more.
In total, I've spent about 2 years in Ukraine. First as an infantryman, then as an instructor, and finally as a drone operator. As I neared the end of my contract, I began building FPV drones from scratch. This was before the new administration humiliated Ukraine and pulled out of the war entirely. I didn't build those.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that's harsh on the situation with the US and Ukraine.
Drones for a hobby. It wasn't because I thought it'd be a cool job. I spoke very publicly about how the USA was no longer a reliable partner, and that self-dependency was the only way forward for Ukraine. And this was before we backed out of Ukraine.
Tough guy.
And then, like clockwork, the election came, leadership changed, and we turned our back on our allies once again.
Bring people, you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems?
Oh, that makes my blood boil.
Regardless of the political reasoning behind it, we were now the ones that were gonna have to swallow that bitter pill.
Second on a running troop.
Which are proving highly.
This pattern of abandonment isn't new. During the Iran protests, our NATO partner, Turkey, who we continually catered to, tipped off Iran to the Kurdish militants that were planning to cross the border and help the protesters. They then struck Kurdish fighters as they were maneuvering, cutting off any external help to the protesters, who were being gunned down in the streets. The Kurds, who had been funded by the USA, just shook their heads and turned back. Then, when the conflict with Iran finally erupted into outright war, the US went straight back to the Kurds. We started sending them weapons and logistics, hoping they would assault the Iranian border.
Now this I remember. I recall when this happened because it was just recent.
We even launched preemptive strikes all along that border, hoping that an initial invasion would invigorate the Iranian populace to rise up. But the Kurds, they learned their lesson. They didn't budge.
Oh, good.
They'd had enough of this story.
Iranian drones' distinctive buzz.
And look at the mess we're in today. We couldn't finish the war because the Kurds were done playing games. They knew US support would evaporate the second they achieved our objectives.
Go, team, let's go!
And that we would leave them to deal with a civil war that we all knew would not result in Kurds having their own land.
Right.
When Iran successfully hit over 50 American targets across the Middle East,
in retaliation,
a glaring vulnerability was exposed. We had no viable air defense solution against the very drone swarms Ukraine had become so accustomed to fighting, because they had to fight on their own. The US Patriot systems were overwhelmed and far too costly per interception. So the regional countries had to independently contract Ukrainian drone operators for their defense, the interceptor pilots. The US couldn't even broker this because we had already severed our partnerships with Kiev long ago. Yet Ukraine, being an honorable nation, provided the expertise, even while being bombed daily themselves. Now we look at Taiwan. The threat of an invasion is glaringly obvious. Unfortunately, I see them relying heavily on the promise of US support. That's why, after everything I've experienced, I volunteer to train Taiwanese forces on FPV drones and the modern combat tactics I've learned. And every time I give a lesson, I always drive home one point. Your defense must be independent of the United States. They are not reliable.
All right, moving up.
If the US had secured its own microchip manufacturing, they wouldn't be involved in the strait at all. You have to be proactive in your own survival. The point of this video isn't to tell you to support the Kurds, Taiwan, or Ukraine. It's a warning. look ahead at how the world is changing, and realize that when the smoke clears, you can only rely on yourself. Racing like
Says this video is dedicated to the countless friends I served with who gave their lives in wars the U.S. forgot about.
Students are bringing home something new, whether it's the combat lessons of today from Ukraine, from some of the instructors, or whether it's incorporating drones into it, or just practicing the basic skills. It's been really encouraging for all the students that take part in this training. And I think it's always fruitful whenever training like this is done.
Good stuff, Civ Div. I love that video. Number one, just seeing his experiences in Syria, Iraq, Ukraine. It's fascinating, right? I only have experience in one war, and that's here in Ukraine, right? And it's so vastly different in every different theater. But a couple things I wrote down I wanted to touch on, then we can end it. I thought his point was interesting about Taiwan and the US, and he said if Taiwan wasn't manufacturing the microchips that the US needed, the US would not be concerned about Taiwan getting invaded by China. And I think that is a very fair point. Of course, there's no way of really knowing, right? Until it happens. But you can only base it off of previous experiences. And just off of what CivDiv mentioned, the U.S. abandoned the YPG, the YBS, Ukraine. I should just say the Kurds, because the Kurds were in both YPG, YBS, Ukraine. Am I missing someone? Maybe not. Anyways, this is such a good point, man, and it does feel good to get some validation, because from what I can tell, and I watch a lot of this content, right, about in this sphere of in this content sphere about Ukraine, about the United States influence on different conflicts, and nobody is very critical of the U.S. In regards to, especially in regards to Ukraine. Like it's almost like saying the word Voldemort in Harry Potter. Anytime I'm like, yeah, the U.S. has failed Ukraine, there's always a handful of comments of people like, oh, he hates Americans. Like, bruh, shut up. That's not it at all. The way I grew up is there was America and Americans, and then the government. They were not one and the same. There was America and Americans that you always love, you always support. There was the government who was supposed to help America and the Americans. That's their only role, was to help. But now the government takes over everything, and America and the Americans, or the little guys, basically kind of trying to survive, more or less, to be honest. And but nowadays, when I say something against the government, it's like I either get painted as some kind of a liberal snowflake, which I'm not, or I'm anti-America, which I'm not. And again, this is only from a handful of people. Most of you guys are actually agree with me. That's why we have such a cool community, a cool tight-knit community, because these are kind of dynamic situations that you have to research on your own. Otherwise, if the only content that you consume is mainstream legacy media outlets like CNN, Fox, ABC, MSNBC, you will be, I don't like using the term brainwashed because it sounds so conspiracy theorist, but it's true, dude. I mean, I used to actually be against that whole idea that mainstream media was brainwashing people, but it's absolutely the case, man. I've seen things, so many things firsthand that are opposite or contrary or contradictory to what mainstream media claims that I just don't believe it anymore. Anyways, the USA being an unreliable ally. I use this quote or this metaphor a lot when I talk about the United States with some friends or family, and I talk about the United States as your really strong younger brother with ADD. Okay, so use this as an example. Your really strong younger brother with ADD. And the reason I say this is because the US is unequivocally un un they're the strongest nation. The US the strongest nation in the world, no matter what. Point blank. Period. I might make that into a shirt. Somebody actually said that in one of the last videos. Point blank. Period. Apparently, I say a lot. But the reason I say the U.S. is your younger brother that's really strong with ADD is because the U.S. only operates in 4 to 8 year terms. So all the policies that the United States comes up with is 4 to 8 years max. And we're seeing this example because just like Sivdiv said, I'm so glad I have him now. I could be like, hey, he said it too. He said the same thing. Just like Sivdiv said, the Kurds were getting support. Bush Sr. died. There was a new presidency. The new president didn't agree with this stuff, removed all the support. That's it. Just like the Budapest Memorandum that was signed in multiple presidencies ago, back in 1994, which guaranteed Ukraine's safety against Russia. That wasn't the current administration's deal, apparently, so they don't have to abide by it. Not their problem. This is what makes the United States an unreliable ally, because they operate in these 4 to 8 year terms. They're really strong. They're your little brother, or I say little brother because the United States is a young country. They were celebrating 250 years, right? That's a blip on the history scale for a country like Ukraine, right? So they're young. The U.S. is, in comparison, a young country overall, and they're very strong, but they have attention deficit disorder because they can only focus on things for 4 to 8 years, metaphorically, right? That's why I use that comparison, but it's the truth. And we see nations like China, for example. China operates in centuries. They operate in dynasties, so multiple decades. The U.S. has such a small scope of the future because it's always about that president, what he can get done in his whole handful of years, because he knows a lot of that's going to get reversed when the new president comes into power if he's of the opposite party. The parties play such a cancerous role, such a toxic role. I genuinely believe it could be the downfall to the United States government as we know it, because the United States was founded off of not liking big government oversight. And the U.S. government has become that monster. No matter what way you slice it, no matter what way you look at it, the U.S. government is an absolute beast of a mechanism that controls most of society at this point, whether directly or indirectly. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still Americans are still free people. A lot of them still live amazing lives. It's not a third world country. It's nothing like that. But Americans don't like corruption or big government or tyrannical governments, right? And the more that this happens with the United States, the more this government gets larger and larger. And in my opinion, the larger a government gets, the more tyrannical they get. They come in tandem. You can't have a massive government that is not very tyrannical. If that's the case, give me an example. So that's it. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it's really cool to get some clarity from CivDiv and some backing on some of the stuff that I claim, because a while there it felt like I was the only one talking about it. And he has such a massive platform, dude. He's got over 1 million subs. He has got a ton of experience, so very cool. Anyways, that's all I got, dude. Great video. Go sub and like and do everything to CivDiv's video. Like I said, he's the GOAT, man. And like and sub here and share. And if you want one of the ORC SHASHLIK shirts, link in description. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next video.